the tough question all display enthusiasts as well as anyone that owns a display has to make. So, pretty much everyone. Mini LED versus OLED. There's mini LED in monitors, in TVs, in iPads, in MacBooks. There's many places you can find mini LED, as well as OLED. A lot of phones have OLED. A lot of tablets also have OLED. And nowadays, more and more laptops are, as well as with TVs and monitors. Specifically today, I am talking about mostly monitors and TVs. So let's go over that first. What will help you make the decision between a monitor and TV? I think most people already have an idea of what they want. If you have a small desk, if you just want the usability of a small workspace, obviously a monitor is better. For most work situations, a monitor is better. For PC usage, generally monitors are better. But I will say TVs have come a long way in terms of being used as a monitor, and I personally use a 65-inch OLED as a TV. Now that is much different. I have a rolling table and a rolling chair. If you are space constrained and you don't want to take up a whole room, then I would recommend a monitor. If you are okay, if you have a big living room or if you have a big office that you can use a TV, that is also totally fine. You can also just go for a smaller TV like a 42 or 48 inch and it won't be as bad as a full 65-inch home theater display. There is differences between mini LED in terms of TV versus monitor, and I'll go over that today. Specifically, mini LEDs tend to be significantly cheaper than OLEDs in the monitor market, but especially in terms of the TV market. You can get a mini LED TV for less than $500 nowadays, whereas an OLED is still hard to get below $1,000. They do exist, but they're few and far between. So there's many other considerations as well in terms of most monitors tend to be matte when it comes to mini LED and OLEDs tend to be glossy, but there is both and they go back and forth. I'll talk about that more later. For now, let's just go over mini LED, its strengths and its weaknesses. One of the most important things to look at when you're buying a mini LED is IPS versus VA, at least in my opinion, because that tells you the response time, the color accuracy, and the native contrast ratio. And that is what I really want to focus on today, is the native contrast of these panels. I personally have been using an IPS mini LED monitor as a second display, and there is many things that I can say about it. In the past, IPS has had the advantage of color and viewing angles and response time. But nowadays, with modern VA technology, with quantum dot layer enhancement for color and mini LED to improve contrast, IPS has lost a lot of its advantages, especially with mini LED, because mini LED already doesn't have great viewing angles. IPS inherently has a significantly lower contrast ratio than VA. Most IPS panels are about 1,000 to 1, and VA tend to be closer to 4,000, 5,000, up to 10,000 native contrast ratio without local dimming. And that makes a huge difference because with an IPS, you generally need a lot more dimming zones to get the same contrast ratio as a VA. And with the lower contrast ratio, blooming is more apparent if you don't have enough zones. So in terms of mini LED, most TVs tend to be VA because they realize it has better contrast. On the market now for monitors, though, there tends to be a lot of IPS mini LEDs, and I would argue most of the time they don't have good enough contrast, at least local contrast. Like the checkerboard contrast ratio tends to be less than 5,000. Most of the time these checkerboard contrast tests with an IPS, their contrast level is worse than a VA without local dimming. So I would say for an IPS in general, you need over 1,000 zones, where a VA, honestly, a couple hundred is plenty. Because of the native contrast, really helps enhance the dark details, and then with the mini LED, it also dims it farther. A lot of mini LEDs today are around 300 to 500 to 1,000 zones. VAs can get away with 300 to 500. IPS really minimum 576. They really need close to 1,000 to get anywhere near the contrast you're looking for. So I would recommend VA if you're looking for a mini LED monitor or TV. A lot of Hisense and TCLs and even Sony's and Samsung's are VA nowadays. You want to look for high native contrast to help out the poppiness of the display. Luckily nowadays, most mini LEDs also come with a quantum dot layer, so they're QLED as people would refer to them. QLED enhances the color greatly, and you get really close to OLED color, and in fact a lot of them might even have better color. So I would argue color is not a huge issue versus these two technologies. A very well made QLED will get really good color just like an OLED. The other major benefit of mini LED versus OLED is overall brightness. They tend to have significantly higher full screen brightness and local brightness. So if you're in a very bright place or you like to keep your lights on and there's a lot of things around you and you need the brightness and the brightness is more poppy to you, mini LED tends to do that better. For example, the mini LED monitor that I have has 1000 nits full screen brightness. There's things that are better than that, but OLEDs don't even come close. OLEDs are generally 200, 300 max. Maybe some newer ones are a little better than that, but they don't get quite, OLEDs do not get quite as bright as mini LEDs. But what I really want to get to today is actually to make the case for OLED. I have used both, and I also understand the budget restrictions that people have. I want mini LED to be good, and I'm sure there is plenty of good ones. But today I'm going to go over why people love OLED so much. Why does most tech enthusiasts prefer it? Number one, micro contrast. Micro contrast is how you can have a literal black pixel and a fully white pixel right next to each other, whereas a mini LED cannot do that. You're reliant on the native contrast ratio of the panel. So for example, with an IPS, if you have a dark and light spot next to each other, the dark cannot get as dark because local dimming can't dim the bright highlight. Sometimes called blooming, but micro contrast is more than that. You can have a black piece of text right next to a white background. It makes dark modes look better. It makes bright and darks together look more correct. Even just text looks better. Another reason is response time. So for gaming and for just motion clarity in general, if you don't like smeary artifacts across the screen, OLED is perfect. It almost has an immediate response time. I think OLED response time is good enough for more than 1000 hertz. We're not even close to that. But response time is super important for monitor usage and for PC gaming or just gaming in general. And even sports, I would argue. So things that have camera movement, you'll get a smoother transition with an OLED. Not as much blur. Obviously, one of the negatives, though, is it does not have quite as good as full screen brightness. But it still does have really good specular highlights and great color. Now, here's my theory as to why even people that don't really care about OLED still can be baffled by OLED. I have a budget-conscious friend that doesn't like spending a lot of money, and even he adores OLED. He got a really good deal on an OLED TV, and it's hard for him to go back. My wife, that doesn't know much about technology at all, it's just not her interest. She knows OLED looks incredible. She can't explain why. She just thinks the colors, it's sharp, it looks very good. Now, here's where my theory comes in, okay? There are three big things I think why OLEDs look better for almost every situation, and people need to talk about it more. My theory, number one, is glossy versus matte. Now, in terms of TVs, most TVs are glossy anyway. In terms of monitors, it's hit and miss. Most actually are matte, with some being glossy. A lot more OLED monitors are glossy, but you can get matte OLEDs. I think that contributes a lot to the clarity. If you used any sort of monitor in the past that wasn't a mirror, it's probably matte. But while matte has its place in office settings, in bright environments when you have a window directly behind you, I think that is actually the main reason why people love OLED so much. It's because most OLED TVs and most OLED monitors are glossy, and glossy gives you that premium feel. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it just shows a little better. I have some pictures here to kind of show you and explain it. It's hard to explain, but matte kind of just has a slight haze to it. It's not bad. At 4K, 4K still looks really sharp, but in terms of a desktop usage, I personally feel the sharpness, the color pop, the clarity, it's just better with glossy. Apple tends to use glossy a lot on their iMacs and their computers. Almost all phones are glossy. I understand the case for matte, but glossy generally gives you that better pop. It gives you better clarity. It gives you a little more sharpness. The way I would describe it is matte has a slight soft tone to it. Even at 4K, it just looks slightly smoothed out versus glossy is very clear. Glossy looks like you're looking through a window. Matte looks like you're looking at a monitor. Or if you want to, there's things you can add to tablets and stuff to make it feel like paper and stuff. And if you prefer the more diffused look, that's up to you. I just personally think glossy is why people like certain displays so much, why they look so good. Because it just has a more clarity. It looks like you're looking through glass instead of through a haze. Here's my second theory on why OLED tends to be more impressive. It's because of the layers. If we look here at the layers of an LCD versus an OLED, OLED just simply has less layers. An LCD has the backlight, the polarizer, glass, a color filter, a cell. There's so many different layers to it to produce the image. Versus an OLED is really just the OLEDs themselves and a color filter of some kind. Whether that be quantum dots or a traditional color filter that has in like WOLEDs. So there's less loss of light and there's less things to distort the image. Now, glossy LCDs can look very good too, but OLEDs, you are just literally physically slightly closer by a couple millimeters to the display. So it feels like it jumps off the screen a little bit more. It looks almost slightly 3D. It's hard to explain. My last point here is, like I was saying earlier, text clarity. Now, there has been dispute on text clarity in OLEDs versus LCDs. In my personal experience, with 2 OLED monitors I've had and plenty of LCDs that I've had, at 4K specifically, OLEDs have so much more clarity. And it's not based off of the sub-pixel structure. It's based off of what I mentioned before, the layers, the glossy, and what I think could be the very distinct difference between light and dark. On an OLED, you can have literally black and white pixels right next to each other. A lot of Word documents, a lot of text processing, or even spreadsheets is black on white or white on black. And the human eye is just better at discerning contrast than anything else. We notice differences between things more than we notice subtleties. So I personally feel, even on a 65-inch TV, text clarity is still incredible on an OLED. Now, text clarity can be really good on an LCD as well, but I specifically think text clarity looks better with glossy, which you can get, it's just not super common on monitors, and because of the micro contrast between the light and dark. I would argue OLED is better in almost every situation, unless you're 8 hours a day on spreadsheets or Word documents. For games, for movies, for desktop usage in general, OLED is better. It gives you better colors, it gives you better contrast, gives you better clarity, and its HDR is incredible. Now, I think Mini LED does have a point in terms of maybe a large format TV, such as a 98-inch or an 85-inch. They're a lot cheaper and they're a lot more obtainable. And when it comes to movie watching, you don't need text clarity. You don't need response time. You don't need perfect local dimming generally. Because the lenses of the camera, the way the video and movie is edited, and the way movies are presented, they generally don't have perfect contrast anyway. so we could actually watch it. There's very few things actually that go true black in terms of movie watching. And mini LED is great at doing the black bars or just giving you that extra contrast you need. But it doesn't need the sharpness. So I think personally going forward, I might go mini LED for a 98-inch TV as a home theater TV, and then keep OLED as my monitor or living room TV for video games and for desktop usage. Now, if you work 8 hours a day, I wouldn't worry too much about OLED burn-in because there's been proof that it's not that bad in modern technology, but it is something to think about, and at that point, maybe an LCD is better. Just know that an LCD probably will be matte and it won't have the clarity you expect. Obviously, every display technology has its place, but this is my case for OLED and why it is better for almost all computer usage and why it gives such a wowing pop and visual clarity benefit over LCD. Until we get a better technology that will replace OLED in terms of perfect response time, perfect contrast, I think OLED will stay on top and be the premium option. I understand it is expensive, but if you find sales, I would heavily recommend it. For a monitor, if you can find something below $600, perfect. There's plenty of 1440p and 4K ones that are going for a good price nowadays. For a TV, OLEDs can get expensive. A lot of people sell them used if you want to go that route. Anyway, go and enjoy your display technology the way you like and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for watching.